Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving in to the aspect host and the detachment that absolutely screams aspect warriors and Biel-Tan and destruction of the Mon-Keigh, right? This is going to be one of the more aggressive detachments that you play. It's going to be one of the most damaging detachments, and it definitely does feel like, back in the day when people would play, Biel-Tan and stuff like that back in ninth edition, it definitely feels like that. Absolutely has that same vibe. So I've had a lot of fun with this detachment. I've played several games with it by now, and it's really quite flavorful. The number of aspects that you can bring, also aspects are just better than they were in the index, which is really exciting. And yeah, I have high hopes for this detachment. Now, I will say off the bat that pretty much most of the detachments that we've seen so far from the Aeldari have already won a GT, right? The win rate for the army is not exceptionally high outside of Ynnari, but we have seen skilled players take a lot of different detachments all the way 5-0, 4-1, you know, win GTs and, do very well at tournaments. So I think it's safe to say that most of these detachments here are great, and there's no single stinker among them, really. And I think that's going to become more and more apparent as we go on. Obviously, there are some that are just better than others, but there's none that are bad per se. And Aspect Host, even though I kind of rated this lower than the Ynnari and the Seer Council, I actually think Aspect Host is very good. And if you're in a meta that needs more damage, this is definitely the one that you should go with. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right in. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the detachment ability of Aspect Hosts, its enhancements and stratagems. We'll do an overview on that. We're going to be talking about the best units in the detachment and why, general strategy, strengths, and weaknesses of the detachment, a close to optimal example army list that I have been using in my own games, and by optimal, I mean just something that I have worked on and that has worked well for me. Of course, this doesn't mean it's going to be optimal in every single meta out there, right? Because obviously, you need to kind of take note of what kind of armies are dominant in your area and stuff like that before you can kind of say something is optimal. And we're also going to do a rundown of how to set up and use the army on Tabletop Simulator. So looking at the detachment bonus here, this is Path of the Warrior. Each time an Aspect Warrior's unit or Avatar of Cain is selected to shoot or fight, and that's every time. That includes Overwatch and stuff like that, and out of, kind of sequence attacks. You get to either reroll hit rolls of 1 or wound rolls of 1 for the unit. A vast majority of the time, you're going to be rerolling hit rolls of 1, but there are going to be times you're going to be rerolling wound rolls of 1 just because you want to, proc dev wounds, or you want to, well, with Warp Spiders, you have no choice because you're shooting a torrent weapon. But yeah, this is very powerful because this does allow your army to have, a greater consistency of damage against a variety of targets. Now let's look at the enhancements. The first one is Aspect of Murder. This is an Autarch or Autarch Wayleaper model. You add 1 to the damage characteristic of melee weapons equipped by the bearer, and those weapons have the precision ability. So I like this one a lot. It does make the Autarch a lot more expensive, but he is going to be with the Starglaive hitting at damage 4. So if you need something in your army that can deal with, 4 wound models like Custodes, can't exactly remember what they're called, with big Terminator Custodes that have like 4 wounds apiece, or you need something that can, deal with 3 wound models that have a -1 damage, or you need to deal with Deathwing Knights, this is a good enhancement for your unit and can very much boost the damage considerably. So have this guy in a unit of Howling Banshees or, a unit of Striking Scorpions or something like that, and you can do quite a bit of damage to those different 4 wound model units. We also have the Mantle of Wisdom, which is probably the most popular one. It allows an Autarch Wayleaper or Autarch's unit to essentially choose both of the benefits from the Path of the Warrior detachment rule. So not only do you get rerolls hits rolls of 1, but you also get rerolls wound rolls of 1. I don't think this is that worth it in most units. My opinion of it is it's really only for Dark Reapers. That's really the only place you want it at. Some people could make the argument of, something like Dire Avengers maybe, but I don't see it with any other unit besides Dark Reapers, because Dark Reapers are mostly going to be hitting on 3+ and wounding on 2+ against anything toughness 5 and below. And if they're shooting at tanks, this does allow them to do a little bit more damage than they would normally be doing. So I think it's worth it on a big squad of Dark Reapers, not worth it anywhere else. And honestly, in my experience of the games I've had, it probably did make up its 30 points value, but it just didn't feel that powerful. It felt like a nice little extra here and there. We also have the Shimmer Stone for 15 points. Now this is essentially fortune for your unit. It gives you a permanent fortune. Autarch or Autarch Wayleaper model only. This is decent. I wish there was a tougher aspect, a quote-unquote tough aspect that we had that could really benefit from this. But we don't, unfortunately. We don't have any aspect warriors that are exceptionally tough that can be led by an Autarch or Autarch Wayleaper. So this ability is just probably not going to be used all too often, except if you need to just spend points on something and this is the only thing you can actually do. Now, I do think this is decent in something like maybe a squad of Striking Scorpions, right? Make them a little bit harder to wound in the early stages of the game, when you're trading with enemy units in your opponent's backfield. But in general, I just don't think it's a stratagem that's really worth it. Then we have Strategic Savant. This is actually pretty decent, but the problem is, what are you actually going to be using it on, and is that going to be a worthwhile trade for you to get those extra OC on that objective? And I have to say, overall, most of the time, if you're using, 120, maybe altogether 160 point unit of Warp Spiders and Autarch or Swooping Hawks and Autarch or something like that to go onto an objective to get OC +5 on it, there's probably going to be better ways to do that, right? I mean, you probably don't need that much OC because your opponent is just going to shoot them off. So I don't see the point of this in a lot of scenarios, but it can be good to steal an objective away from an opponent if they don't have anything to retaliate against you. All right, so let's go on to the stratagems. First, we have Warrior's Focus. This right here is the reason you really take this detachment, right? And the reason being is you choose an aspect warrior unit in your shooting or fight phase. It's or, so you get to, basically, use it. You can actually use it in both phases if you want to. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack, you can ignore any modifiers to ballistic skill, weapon skill, strength, armor penetration, and damage characteristics, or any modifiers to the hit roll. So, things like Rogaldorns with the blank of damage, or Magnus with the blank of damage, and -1 damage abilities, all of a sudden become very vulnerable to the models in your army. Your fire dragons, who, normally units like Magnus would just laugh at before, it's now a credible threat. Same thing with Rogaldorns. 5 fire dragons in the index could not kill a Rogaldorn unless you rolled well. In this detachment specifically, with this stratagem, 5 fire dragons can easily pick up a Rogaldorn without any problem. And I've actually done this in one game with the Rogaldorn and in another game against a Gladiator Lancer. So, Gladiator Lancer wasn't that big of a deal, but the Rogaldorn is, because obviously, ignoring basically every modifier is really powerful. So if somebody pops smoke against you, it does nothing. If somebody, like for example, you're going against something like Death Guard and you're in their aura of -1 weapon skill, -1 ballistic skill, all that good stuff, you ignore it, right? So Warrior Focus is one of the best stratagems for the Eldar as far as damage dealing goes. It really just pumps up the reliability of your units to 11. Oh, and not even to mention Satan Shards, right? This thing allows fire dragons to hit Satan Shards and one-shot them. To Their Final Breath is another great stratagem. So basically, you target one aspect warrior avatar of Cain just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. And it's fight on death, right? So it's basically a 4-up fight on death normally, or it's a 3-up fight on death if you remove an aspect shrine token. This is really good if like your unit of striking scorpions gets charged, or if you're running Avatar of Cain, if your Avatar of Cain gets charged and killed. It's good in those scenarios. But to be honest with you guys, it's not going to have much of a use outside of a few times a game, maybe not even that. Unless you're going against a very melee-centric list, but even then, you're going to have your Howling Banshees with strike first. The only real units this is going to be useful on are things like striking scorpions or shining spears, who do not have access to fights first. But it is still useful to have in your pocket when it does come up. Next, we have Skyburn Sanctuary. This is a big one. This allows you to re-embark a Azerani unit from your army, right? So basically, only infantry can fit in there anyway. So it is going to be at the end of the fight phase. And if you're not within engagement range, then you can get back in the transport if you're within 6 inches of it. So you need to be wholly within, but if you are, you can get back in the transport. This is great for things like Dark Reapers, who can, kind of move out 6 inches from the transport, shoot, and then hop back in the transport for safety. Usually you're going to use this with a Wave Serpent, with Dark Reapers or Fire Dragons or something like that, to protect them a little bit more. So now, as you will know by now, there are a lot of good stratagems in this detachment. You do need a lot of stratagem and CP generation to make this work. So an Autarch with a free stratagem a turn perhaps, or Eldrad Uthran can really help out this detachment a lot, because there's just so many good strats that you can use. The next one is Doom Inescapable. This is from the Avatar of Cain only. Not my favorite enhancement, but it basically gives his Wailing Doom ranged weapon damage characteristic of 18 and range of 18 and damage characteristic of 8. Not great. Not great. Unless you roll a 6 on your, Wailing Doom attack, it's just not going to do that much damage. So unless you get the sustained hits, it's not going to do a lot. Now, I really do think that if they gave the Avatar of Cain a couple of aspect tokens, that it would be much better. But unfortunately, the Avatar of Cain is just not good. Even in this detachment, I just don't feel like he is a valuable include. Next, we have Preternatural Precision. This is a very good stratagem that allows you to get ignores cover, lethal hits, or sustained hits on your shooting attacks in the shooting phase. So that's fantastic. You can use a Aspect Shrine token to give you 2 of the abilities, so lethal hits and sustained hits. In my experience, in the very beginning, I was thinking that you would always use this, but I actually don't think that's the case now. I think you probably want to just use one of these. Sometimes you might want to use 2 on things like the Dark Reaper units. So if you have a big unit of Dark Reapers in a transport, using lethal hits and sustained hits to pop a tank is really good. And you have 2 of those in a big squad of 10. So this is kind of more useful for that, right? But if you're using a squad of Fire Dragons, for example, you might want to just pop the unit of, pop the Aspect Shrine token on a sustained hit. You might want to just go sustained hits 1, pop a Shrine token to give you an extra hit, right? That's basically what you want to do with those units. So you don't always want to use lethal hits and sustained hits combined. Sometimes you want to just, kind of use one of the Aspect Shrine tokens to boost the damage on one of your, units. If it has sustained hits, just kind of make it a 6 to hit, get that extra attack, and you don't really want to worry about lethal hits so much. But it is a great ability. I really love it on a squad of 10 Dark Reapers, and I'm sold on that unit now as a staple in this army. It is so good. It's good against almost every transport in the game, besides the super heavy ones, right? I mean, most transports are toughness 10 or less, so you're at worst wounding on 4s, and then your opponent is taking saves at -2 with ignores cover. And usually transports only have like a 3 up. So they're at a 5 up. So they're taking like, usually if you also throw lethal hits and sustained hits on it, you're doing like 6 wounds to it. So you're doing like 9 damage to any transport that you come across. I think that's really, really powerful. Quite good, quite good. So yeah, this is a fantastic stratagem for Dark Reapers. And it's really good on Fire Dragons as well for that sustained hits 1, but not always necessary. Last, we have Kane's Vengeance. This one is not the best, but weirdly enough, it's actually low key, kind of useful in some situations. And I'll give you one situation where it is really useful. So you select one Aspect Warrior or Avatar of Kane unit in your opponent's movement phase just after they basically fall back. Now, this is not going to be some sort of gotcha thing. You have to tell your opponent of this, right? You have to say, hey, I have the ability to make you take a Desperate Escape test. So, for a CP. And basically what'll happen is whatever your opponent has, usually the math on your combat aspects, your striking scorpions, your howling banshees, add up to where the only thing that's going to be left in the unit typically is a character and maybe one model, right? Especially in Aspect Host. In Aspect Host, it's usually just going to be the character model. And especially if you have like Howling Banshees with Jane Czar, that character might be already dead or it might not be. But if it's not, and they choose to fall back with it, they have to take a Desperate Escape and they could just automatically die. Like, my opponent in one situation, I was able to consolidate 6 inches into one of his, bigger blobs of guardsmen. And that bigger blob of guardsmen wanted to fall back from combat, but couldn't because they were going to have to take like 15 Desperate Escape tests. And yeah, that just wasn't going to happen, right? Because you have to take a Desperate Escape test for every model, and you could lose a lot of models that way, and it was just probably not worth it. So he decided, I'm just going to stay in combat, and, it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Kane's Vengeance is good, but it's situational, and you might not be able to use it that often. Okay, so what are the best units in the detachment and why? So Fire Dragons are up there, right? They're absolutely the best, one of the best units in this detachment. They hit extremely hard, but are now even deadlier with sustained lethal hits and the ability to ignore modifiers. Also, rerolling ones to hit is really good. If you can get any kind of rerolls outside of vehicles and monsters, that is useful. So to give you an example, sometimes your opponent's just not going to bring a lot of vehicles, right? They're going to bring probably almost no vehicles in some situations. At least then your Fire Dragons are still doing good damage against heavy infantry. Now, I can think of quite a few, like, for example, Custodes lists that just bring a bunch of Wardens and bring a bunch of those, kind of Terminator equivalent. I can't remember what they're called. Remind me in the comments. But they're the big guys, the 4-wound guys. They're not vehicles, so Fire Dragons aren't getting rerolls against them, but they can still do significantly good damage with rerolls 1s to hit or rerolls 1s to wound. Both Banshees and Scorpions are also great units. They love the fight on death. Banshees not so much, but Scorpions do like fight on death. And the ignores modifiers, right? So if your opponent has a -1 to hit or something like that, Death Guard are a perfect example where they're like -1 ballista skill, -1 to hit, and then you'd like hit on 5s. Well, we don't care about that in Aspect Host because for a CP, we could just destroy your squad anyway, right? So your Death Shroud Terminators are out the fucking window. They're not going to be that good. And this allows Banshees to charge into a Fights First unit as well and still get damage off. So the one thing you can do with the stratagem is sometimes your opponent will have a really hard-hitting melee unit with Fights First. A great way of getting rid of that, especially in the mirror match, is to charge in your Banshees. Your opponent's Banshees are going to kill all your Banshees. Then you pop the Aspect Shrine token, and then you kill all the enemy Banshees on the return hits, right? So it's on a 3+ with the use of an Aspect token, so that's going to be much better. And yeah, it's going to allow you to trade much more efficiently into units, and that basically cripples your opponent's unit, right? So if later in the game you need to charge something else into a unit that is, more vulnerable on your, opponent's side, they're not going to have that Fights First heroic intervention anymore. Dark Reapers and Dire Avengers also love the rerolls granted by the detachment bonus as well as sustained and lethal hits. Dire Avengers just mostly like the rerolls and sometimes the lethal hits. Sustained hits they don't really care about because they already have so many attacks. They're not really wounding that often. What they really want to do is make sure that their hits actually go through and wound correctly. So, Dire Avengers with a Zerman is really good. Usually what you're going to do, though, is you're going to end up, just using the sustained hits for Zerman's, like, mega combo. But when the mega combo or mega mini feat of a Zerman is gone, you can easily use lethal hits on them to generate value throughout multiple turns. I am also going to talk about Dire Avengers in a Falcon with a Zerman, because a lot of people think it's not a good combo because it doesn't trade well. But I'm going to guarantee that if you position your models correctly, your opponent's not going to have anything to strike back effectively, and you are going to be able to survive at least 2 turns, right? So during those 2 turns, if you hit the right targets, you definitely can trade up. And in all of my games that I played, they did very well. Like, between the 2 units, between the Dire Avenger shooting and a Zerman shooting over the course of 2 turns, they're able to do quite a lot of damage. Lycus also allows critical hits to proc on 5+, which does help boost several units and their damage. And she's good herself, right? She can move 24 inches, 26 if she uses an aspect battle focus token. I'm getting all the things mixed up sometimes, but yeah, the battle focus token will give her +2 to her, flicker jump with the squad of warp spiders, and she can charge into something and also, proc her own lethal hits and the Exarch's lethal hits on 5+2, which makes them a very significant melee threat also. Wave Serpents and Falcons are key to this list for allowing units to jump back in their respective transports with Skyborn Sanctuary, protecting them for longer. Autarchs and, Autarch Wayleapers add mobility and damage to the units they join, and they get a free strat per turn. I don't really like the Autarch Wayleaper because I don't think, getting a battle focus token back on 3+ isn't as good as just for an Autarch on foot. Being able to re-roll battle focus moves or advance rolls, I think that's just way better for a cheaper cost and for units that are actually going to want to be in combat versus the alternative. So a lot of people are kind of swearing by the Autarch Wayleaper. I personally think Lycus is just better, right? She just does more for the unit. And I think that with Swooping Hawks, you just want Baja, right? You just want the Phoenix Lords, guys. Like, at this point in the game. That may change if things get nerfed, but for now, you really just want the Phoenix Lords with their respective, Warp Spiders or Swooping Hawks, and you want the Autarchs on foot with things like Howling Banshees, Striking Scorpions, stuff like that, or maybe even Dark Reapers, right? But even so, like, Jane Czar is, like, way better than a foot Autarch as well in a squad of Banshees. So, a Zerman or Assman is also very good with getting access to sustained hits via the strat. And regardless of the range, he is just an absolute world beater in most lists. There's going to be some matchups that he's not good in, right? If he goes against an all-vehicle list, it's not going to be that great. But as long as there's infantry, elite infantry to go after, he usually makes up his points if you're not stupid with them and just throw him out there to get killed, right? Even if he's not doing anything during the first few turns, just the threat of having him on the board is very dangerous. Like, in the game I played against my opponent, he was using a squad of Ogryn, and my opponent essentially couldn't deploy the Ogryn first because he knew that Assman would just clap them right away, right? Like, Assman was just going to clap those Ogryn cheeks, and my opponent had a really hard time trying to maneuver around the Falcon because Falcons are fast. Chimeras are pretty fast as well, but not quite as fast, if that makes sense. Jane Czar is also very good, adds a ton of threat range to Banshees, and hits really hard against mech equivalents and character units. Fuegan gets multiple activations with a solid melee profile and a very dangerous anti-MEQ or TEQ, which is mech equivalent or Terminator equivalent gun. Or, he has a good anti-large profile as well. So Fuegan's good. I know, again, some people might not be convinced of him, but he is a multi-phase threat. And I think that's what people have to get out of it is, if you put Fuegan in a squad of Fire Dragons, you are trying to protect them a little bit better. So you are going to use things like Skyborn Sanctuary to pull them back into a transport. You're not going to just leave them out there to die. And when your opponent kills or, damages the Wave Serpent, then your, Fuegan model can get, can disembark behind terrain, and you can go forward again, shoot another tank, and then charge into something. And because Fuegan has a good melee threat, he is going to be doing some serious damage, and he gets back up, right? And that's all for 120 points. It's not a lot of points. And we have seen Fuegan in several competitive builds that have been successful at tournaments. Okay, so let's talk about general strategy, strengths, and weaknesses of the detachment. So the general strategy is this is a fast-moving detachment that focuses on target elimination with souped-up aspect warriors that take out your opponent's ability to effectively establish board control. So that's kind of what it aims to do, right? It aims to take out your opponent's units as soon as they come out, take out their hardest and, most damage-dealing units, and then kind of control the board from there. Right? If your opponent is not able to establish primary control, then this army can quickly have the run of the table, and you don't need to have, very tough units yourself to score primary points. And also, this list is very fast. So using things like warp spiders and, sometimes swooping hawks, if you like those, or whatever, to destroy secondary units in the early game, and then follow up with hard-hitting, coordinated strikes on enemy damage dealers, enables your primary scoring with your fragile aspect warriors. So yeah, basically, your goal is to kill as much as possible. So maybe on turn 2, you really don't score that many primary points. Maybe you score your home objective and one other objective that you're on, and that's it, right? So you don't score more than your opponent right away, but you use maybe some of your other units to move block, prevent their primary scoring, or perhaps just kill their units so that they can't actually score the objectives. And then you kind of just strike at their most heavy and hard-hitting units, kill them, and then remove your opponent's ability to essentially dominate the battlefield. So the strengths of this list are that it is the most hard-hitting detachment, and it cares nothing about your opponent's defensive strats and abilities. In a lot of ways, the Aeldari detachments in the Codex are answers to many of the popular list archetypes that we've seen in competitive play, right? Aspect Warriors is definitely a counter to things like Deathwing Knight armies that have that -1 damage on their Deathwing Knights and, tons of abilities to like be at -1 to hit and stuff like that outside of that, like with Raven Guard and stuff, right? And it's really good against Satan Shards and Wraith units, Canoptic Wraiths and Necrons. So the Aspect Host is essentially, think of it like this, right? Those tough armies are like a tough walnut. It takes a lot to crack. Well, this army's a nutcracker, right? And I mean that in every possible sense. With a lot of rerolls and critical effects, you basically ensure that enemy units are destroyed, and the aspects are very quick and maneuverable, so you can get into position quickly, and your opponent can't really do a lot about it because you have Ignore Overwatch as one of your battle focus abilities. The weaknesses, however, are that there is no fallback and shoot or charge, so it is susceptible to getting locked in combat. This army, if not screened correctly, this army can go down very quickly to things like orcs or things like blood angels or world eaters that are just going to kind of charge you, zerg you, if you will, and just eliminate you within the first couple turns of the game. So having no fallback, shoot, and charge really sucks because they can kill a unit and then consolidate into the next one with 6-inch consolidations. A lot of those detachments have that. There's also no mobility strats outside of Skyburn Sanctuary, so it does rely on units being innately fast. So that's why you probably want to take a lot of warp spiders, a lot of, fast moving units that can either move block for you or threaten enemy infantry. And it is very fragile with no real defensive strats. This detachment has 0 defensive capabilities, doesn't have lightning fast, it doesn't have a -1 damage, it doesn't have a cover strat, it has nothing of the sort. So that is going to be a challenge. You do have to use your units pretty perfectly, and whatever you hit, you have to kill, because if you don't kill what you hit, your army starts to fall apart. Okay, so here's the list I came up with, and I actually think this is quite a good list. If I'm not trying to toot my own horn here too much, but I think it's a pretty powerful and well-balanced list. There's a couple different ways you can go about this list. You can basically either ignore Skyburn Sanctuary and just go for all fast-moving units that can kind of cross the board quickly, or you can go more into the transports. I decided more to go into the transports because I like them. I like Wave Serpents. I like Falcons. They've always kind of suited my playstyle. So for characters, we do have a Zerman. We have an Autarch with the Mantle of Wisdom. Of course, he has the Reaper Launcher and the Starglaive. He's going to go with the Reapers. We have Eldrad Uthran. I think Eldrad's an auto-include for obvious reasons. You need the extra stratagems to make this army work effectively. And you also need the ability to swap out secondaries in the first few turns of the game so that you can basically have the best chances of maxing your secondary scoring. We have Janezar with the Howling Banshees. We have Lycus as well. So those are our characters. We do have a whopping 5 characters in this list, so very easy to assassinate, but that's okay because we're going to hopefully destroy enough units to where our opponent is going to be hard pressed to actually assassinate much of anything. Our battle line consists of Storm Guardians for sticky objectives because this army is going to be on the move all the time. We don't have time to put a unit on the backfield typically, so sticking the objective will be very important. If we do need to babysit the objective, I'd rather do it with a unit of Storm Guardians, something that can, kind of stay in the back. Eldrad can kind of support the army with his extra stratagem use, and we don't really have to worry too much about, keeping additional units back there. One unit of Storm Guardians is great for screening by itself. For dedicated transports, we have 2 units of Wave Serpents with the Bright Lances and Shuriken Cannon, which they're just the durable kind of tanks to, take some hits, deliver the, payload to its target, and so forth. We have 2 5-man units of Dark Reapers, which are going to be a 10-man. So yeah, just a 10-man unit. I don't know why I said it like that. We have a max unit. Exarch has a missile launcher. Rest of them have Reaper launchers. The missile launcher is very good, right? It gets, it hits on a 2+. It's a regular missile launcher, but it is just better than the Reaper launchers. It does significant amounts of damage to, light to medium vehicles, and it can also do some decent damage to infantry. We have a unit of 5 Dire Avengers to go with the Zerman. We have the Falcon at 130 points to also go with the Zerman, but sometimes we may switch that out depending on the matchup. Sometimes the Zerman can just be in reserve via rapid ingress, can come in, shoot, deal its damage, and then die if our opponent just has one really elite target. Or we can simply just put them in the Falcon and do it, or we could put Banshees in the Falcon. It really doesn't matter too much. We have 2 units of Fire Dragons here. One has the Fire Pike, and the other has the Exarch's Dragon Fusion Gun. So I'm kind of a little bit on the fence with this. I think either one is good, the Fire Pike and the Dragon Fusion Gun. Dragon Fusion Gun gets extra damage. The Fire Pike, though, gets extra range and strength. So I like the Fire Pike personally better, but I've decided to go 1 for 1 to see which one I truly like better. And I think after my game, I have to say, I think the Fire Pike is just better. Being able to wound easier with rerolls is just so much better in my honest opinion than having the extra damage. Like, against most targets, you're wounding on 5s. So the Exarch's Dragon Fusion Gun is good if you can get it to wound, but you're just not getting it to wound against a lot of targets effectively and efficiently. So that's unfortunate about it, and that's why I think Fire Pike is just kind of the way to go in most cases. It also helps when you can split fire with the Fire Pike against something else if you are in melee range, or sorry, melter range, I should say, of another tank or, monster. So I think the Fire Pikes are just better in general, and probably in most scenarios, I would say. We have a unit of 5 Howling Banshees with the Executioner. We have a unit of 3 Shroud Runners, which I wasn't quite sold on in this type of list. I have to admit, I think this list probably just wants more Aspect Warriors, and I did probably just miss having more aspects in this list, but I didn't quite have the points, so I'm going to have to figure out another kind of method to do it. But thinking of swapping out the Shroud Runners, we have 2 units of Striking Scorpions with Biting Blades. Biting Blades are the superior choice. We have Warp Spiders, 2 units of them. One has the Power Blade array with Lycus, and one has the ranged build with the Spinneret Rifle and Death Weavers. So that other unit of Warp Spiders that's not going to go with Lycus is flexible. It can start on the board, it can deep strike, it can do a lot of different things, but basically it's going to be a shooting unit that aims towards taking out vulnerable targets on objectives or in the opponent's backfield. All right, so what we're going to do next is I am going to show you what the army looks like on Tabletop Simulator and just run through kind of some brief strategies on how to deploy the list and how to, kind of analyze what you should do with the army. So in just a second, we'll be right on Tabletop Simulator. Alrighty guys, welcome to the Tabletop Simulator demonstration where I show you guys what the army looks like on the table and how to generally play it. So here's the army. Now as you can see, fairly small, but we have a ton of aspect warriors in this list. We have the Falcon, which will normally carry a Zerman and 5 Dire Avengers. However, that's not always going to necessarily be the case. If we're in a matchup in which we need a little bit of extra threat range with Janzar and Banshees, we can put them in there as well. We have 2 units of 5 Warp Spiders, one which will be carrying Lycus in it, so that's going to be our melee-oriented build, and then we're going to have a more ranged-oriented Warp Spider unit as well. We have our Autarch with the Reaper Launcher, goes with the Reapers. He does have the Mantle of Wisdom, however, I'm a little bit on the fence about it. Personally, after the game that I had, the other day, I don't know if it's super good value, but that could just be because I didn't really roll a lot of ones. I rolled a lot more twos, which was almost like a slap in the face because I went out on a limb to take that upgrade, and then of course I just rolled twos, which was just that's just Warhammer, right? And we do have our unit of Storm Guardians. And again, if you're wanting to go with it, you don't care about objectives, you just want to go straight towards the enemy and smash them, then Storm Guardians are probably not a fantastic unit. But I have Eldrad in this list. I want to keep up, my stratagem use and stuff like that. I want to have CP when I need it. So Eldrad's in there with Storm Guardians as a protection. We have 2 Wave Serpents. One's carrying 10 Fire Dragons. One is carrying the Dark Reapers in it. With the Autarch, we have our 5 Dire Avengers, which are, with a Zerman. And we have 10 Striking Scorpions and 3 Shroud Runners. Again, Shroud Runners are just more of an objective unit, more of a sacrificial pawn, if you will. They're pretty cheap. I think in future lists, I might actually just swap them out because my experience with them was that they were good, they were decent, but they were just, with all the tanks I have in this list, they were just a little bit too hard to hide in certain scenarios. And I found that they were dying within a couple turns. I'd score an objective, my opponent would take them, kind of as an easy kill. And one of the things that Shroud Runners lost was a point of armor, which, they used to have a 4-up save, now they have a 5-up save. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but as I play them more and people are shooting bolters at them, I am noticing a difference in the amount of saves they can make. So I might actually switch those out in this particular list. I think normally they're really good. It's just in this list, you can just, basically pop a strat for ignores cover. And there's other units in the army that you can use for secondary objectives. So I might swap them out for like a Viper or something like that. Something a little bit easier to hide. The Viper's easier to hide than these guys, believe it or not. And, can basically, it doesn't have scout or anything like that, but can basically do the same thing as these guys can do for a little bit less points. Or some Rangers or something, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking with this list. However, I found that the rest of the list worked really well. There was just a few tweaks here and there. And if you guys really wanted to go aggressive and you didn't want the Storm Guardians, you could always run Eldar by himself. Just hopefully the opponent doesn't have indirect fire. And you could run a 3rd unit of Warp Spiders. You could run a 2nd unit of Howling Banshees. You could do a lot with that. So this is the army. So how do you deploy it on the battlefield? Well, this is the kind of board that we decided we're going to play on. And this is how I ended up deploying, but it was only because I was mirroring my opponent's movements in a couple ways. So I want to kind of go through what you should do and what you should kind of focus on with this list. So this list is going to be a hard-hitting, fast, and aggressive list. What you're going to be wanting to do is stage as fast as possible, which is why we had these Striking Scorpions here and here. I didn't know who was going to go first, of course, because that's a roll-off. It's pretty much a 50-50. So I decided to hedge my bets and make sure that no scout moves could go through. He did have a couple units of scouts in his army. Or not scouts, what are they called? I played against Imperial Guard. I can't remember what they're called, but the engineers, that's what they're called. The combat engineers. And I didn't want them to get an early jump on any of my stuff because, believe it or not, combat engineers can just scout up with move, and they could just pretty much, if they get line of sight on a wave serpent or they get line of sight on something with grenades, they can easily not one shot it, but they can bring it down to like 4 wounds, right? On a good roll. So I didn't want that. So I had my striking scorpions blocking them out here so that they couldn't scout within 9 inches of me, right? So that's kind of the idea there. And then, of course, these guys have scout themselves, so I could kind of counter scout them out. That was the idea anyway. And it did work. So, however, having said that, if my opponent didn't have any scouts, didn't have any infiltrators, I would not have deployed these striking scorpions on the side. I would have deployed them over here with these ones and just had 2 squads kind of more next to each other so that I could control this side of the battlefield. So with Eldar, you really want to focus on one side of the battlefield at a time. You want to focus on one objective on the left or right, usually the one that has the most terrain on it. So for example, your side of the board is the one where the runes are facing towards you, the inside of them. That means you have the advantage in positioning. So this is your side of the board right here, right? It's also the side that kind of goes up more, in case you guys are wondering. This is sweeping engagement. So your side of the board is going to be the one that deploys a little bit farther up here with the red line. And that's where you want to focus your attention, because you're going to have a positional advantage from this side of the battlefield. Your opponent, however, is going to have the positional advantage from this side. So you don't really want to use too many units over here. You might want to throw maybe 1 unit of warp spiders, which I did here because he did have a, unit of catachans and a chimera right here. And basically, this is an easy objective grab the first turn. So I just wanted to make sure that I had something to deny him primary on this side. If he decided to get the catachans out on the objective, they could just, wipe him out. This unit right here, this wave serpent, was actually carrying all of the Dark Reapers, so I could have easily just, disembarked the Dark Reapers, killed the Chimera, followed up with some Warp Spiders, and taken that objective away from them. There's only so much you can put on the physical objective for Imperial Guard, and all the stuff in our army can very easily deal with that. So that's kind of what I was thinking there. And it did work for the first turn, and then, of course, Imperial Guard just have so many tools at their disposal. But also had, again, like I said, the striking scorpions to kind of prevent the Kriegers from coming up and doing their thing. We have Lycus with a squad of warp spiders here in the center. Now, I like deploying Lycus in the center if I can, because her movement value with any kind of, immune to Overwatch or anything like that is insane. She can move 24 inches, right? So that puts us right about here in the midboard. Now, you're not going to want to always move this far, but if you just just about there. I know it's a little less. She can get line of sight to anything here, anything behind here. She can get line of sight to things like right here behind the wall if she wants to, right? Like she can kind of scoop and get line of sight to some stuff, which, I mean, there's not usually people doing that, but from what I found, my opponent had a squad of Kriegsmen right here, engineers, and I was actually able to, potentially pop them turn 1 if I had gone first, which I ended up not going first, but it is what it is. And these warp spiders can take something out and also assault something as well. So the other thing is Lycus can just, that you can move straight forward 24 inches. Actually, as long as there's nothing that can overwatch, you can move up to 26. And then once you're at 26, you can first turn charge anything behind here. And believe it or not, that could be extremely disruptive. Like if you're going against a guard player and they have a command squad kind of build right here with Ursula Creed and Catachans or whatever it is, and you are able to pull that off and your opponent doesn't stop you, that is huge because now they're going to lose all of their orders. By the way, for 1 CP, she can use Epic Challenge and she can kill Ursula like nothing. So just keep that in mind. So I like to put her right here in the center. I put the Howling Banshees with Jane Czar right here as well because they have a 16-inch movement with their advance. So they can get to about here and charge anything behind here or here, right? So if my opponent's stage is here, I can hit them. if my opponent's over here, I can hit them as well. We had the Shroud Runners over here, and basically my plan with these guys was just to kind of use them either in two ways. Use them as kind of like a roadblock and an objective holder to, keep my opponent at bay if I went first. I was just going to zoom these guys up and block my opponent's Chimera movements, maybe score an objective at the same time. Or if I didn't go first, which is what ended up happening, I would just slide back behind here, and I would just use them as anti-infantry, destructors or anti-infantry killers. Which, scatter lasers do kill infantry pretty well. We had, again, the Wave Serpent, the Dark Reapers. We had Storm Guardians here. One Storm Guardian towing the home objective, and that's it. I really didn't want to take too much firepower because I knew for a fact that my opponent had a Rogel Dorn over here. So my biggest fear in this game was actually Rogel Dorn coming out this way and getting line of sight in the Storm Guardian. However, my opponent decided that using a Rogel Dorn to kill Storm Guardians and putting it out in the open for, potentially Dark Reapers or Fire Dragons to get free shots at wasn't the best idea. So didn't end up doing it. So kind of, I guess, lucky me there. This deployment, this sweeping engagement with this map is actually really bad for your home objective because it's kind of exposed. So I just wanted to sticky this objective and then leave. And that's exactly what happened. Over here, we have our Fire Dragons. He deployed a lot of vehicles here, actually, which was kind of shocking to me. He had, his another Rogel Dorn right here. He had behind here a Leman Russ Commander. So, the Leman Russ Commander could order the Rogel Dorn and so forth. And that combination just made me just auto-place my Fire Dragons here because I knew that they were going to just be doing so much damage over the course of the game. Like, this firing lane is secure, right? This firing lane is secure. So I needed to take those things out ASAP. So that's what these guys did. And basically, there's a couple things you could do with the Fire Dragons. You could just kind of wait here and just kind of go up behind here and just wait for them to come out. What I did, however, is you could just move over this little piece right here, basically for free. So what I did was I star engined. The Wave Serpent moves 14 inches base, which puts you right about here. And then star engines, you can move another, on average, I think it's like, what is it, D6 plus 1? Yeah, I think it's like 3 inches average or 4 inches average. So you can move up to 18 inches about. So you can get right up here, which is a good position because not a lot can shoot you from over in this angle, right? So that's pretty good. You can do that later in the game though. So what you basically do is turn 1, you move up as close as possible to this, and then you star engine afterward, just to guarantee that you can safely be behind this, even if you roll bad on your star engine, because sometimes star engine, you roll that 1 and you don't want that. So this is kind of how the army was positioned. I deployed a Zerman and the Falcon right here. And basically, Imperial Guard, they don't have a lot of tough infantry, but he did have a unit of Ogryn in his list in a Chimera. So, I was kind of just waiting to see where he was going to put his Chimera. His Chimera was kind of like hovering around here. So, I was kind of waiting to see if the Ogryns went towards this objective or this objective, and I was just going to kind of follow wherever the Ogryns went. Because obviously if a Zerman is not shooting high value infantry targets, that he's not making up his points, right? Now, I think a Zerman is a fantastic character. His one weakness is against low, kind of low value armies, things with a lot of infantry spam, but that's where the Dire Avengers kind of pick up the slack. So, a lot of people would look at Dire Avengers and say, oh, they just are awful, right? They're terrible. They're garbage. They can only kill light infantry. But out of a Falcon, on average rolls, they will kill 3 Marines. You have the Exarch with the dual catapults. So they're throwing out 24 attacks. In Aspect Host, they're rerolling 1s to hit. You can give them sustained. You can give them lethals. So they actually do quite well. A lot of people are saying they suck. I think maybe they suck in other detachments because you don't get any kind of buffs on them. But when you start layering the buffs of Aspect Host on them, they don't become attacks. They're not attacks anymore. They're actually a good unit. So I fully stand behind the Dire Avenger Zerman combo here. And there's certain situations where you'll go up into Knights or something, but even against Knights, if you have 5 Dire Avengers and a Zerman, you could always pop lethal hits. Um, it's 1 CP to basically ensure that you're doing damage to something, right? And he has damage 2 weapons. Once per game, he gets damage 3 weapons with dev wounds. With rerolls to wound out of a falcon, that can still kill a baby knight if you're lucky enough, right? So like his weapons are strength 5. You'll be wounding on 6s, but you're getting rerolls to wound. And you're also getting lethal hits. So you'll probably proc at least 1 dev wound. So that's, that's 3 wounds right there. And then you'll probably get another wound through as well with lethal hits. And then the Dire Avengers are doing, however many lethal hits they're going to get. And that's not terrible. It's not the best, but I think that's probably the worst matchup for Zerman is against a pure vehicle army or a pure monster army, and he's still doing something. So I find that okay. That's acceptable to me. Fire Dragons, of course, will melt that stuff, and Dark Reapers will do a significant amount of damage as well. I'm really impressed with Dark Reapers. 10 of them, I actually didn't think that the 10-man unit of Dark Reapers would be really effective. I thought it'd be just a huge point sink, but the fact that they have so much range and they could just sit back and just shoot every turn of the game, that's what makes it good. I think 10 Fire Dragons, way too exposed. 10 Dire Avengers, way too exposed. 10 Dark Reapers, thumbs up, right? Because you could just sit them in the back here. And literally what I was doing all game, pretty much, is I was just hopping them out the 3 inches, right? I was hopping them out. By the way, as soon as these guys move, right, you could just kind of put the Dark Reapers behind there if you wanted to and just come in and out, pop out of the Wave Serpent, come out, move, pop into the Wave Serpent, right? So there is that as well. And it was just a very good situation. Turn 1, I didn't really have a lot of good targets except for the Chimera here. So, obviously you pop that off right away. But anyway, so yeah, this is how you want to deploy the army. If your opponent has a ton of stuff over here, you're not gonna and basically has like maybe like a bunch of Rogel Dorns or something like that. Putting a squad of Fire Dragons, or no, sorry, Warp Spiders here, not a good idea. You probably want to put them over here, where they can make more of a difference on this side of the battlefield, or deep strike them. Shroud Runners, same thing. You probably want to use them to move block to prevent your opponent from getting on these objectives and scoring on turn 2. But other than that, that's all you want to do with them. Striking Scorpions are here for the same reason, except that I wanted to stop scout moves from happening, so that's why they were there. But if my opponent didn't have scouts, I would have easily moved them over here and just created a huge zone of control on the left-hand side of the board. And it's also all about, with this army, it's all about managing your threats, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where you overkill a bunch of stuff. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say if I can actually add in something here, because I think I have a guard list somewhere. No, maybe I don't. Let's just assume that this predator is, a guard tank, right? A Lehman Russ or a Rogel Dorn or something like that, right? Moves up here to shoot something. Tries to get line of sight through here. Maybe just barely pops out right there. Shoots something downwind at a middle objective and kills it, right? That's what the Rogel Dorn does. Well, watch what happens if I jump the gun, okay? Sometimes it's better to leave the Rogel Dorn here than make a bad choice. So if I do star engines, and let's say I roll a 3 on star engines, so I'm moving 18 inches, right? I move 18 inches up here. I move right about here. Well, actually, I could probably... Wait a second. Let me just make sure I know there's an easier way to do this, guys. For some reason it's... Yeah, here we go. Okay. So I move 18 inches, right? Making sure I don't pivot or anything like that because I want the full movement. 18. Move right there. And of course, if I need to, if I get popped by something, I could always fade back, right, behind this ruin wall. And I drop out my Fire Dragons, right? They move 3 inches. I'm dumping out 2 squads of them. Now, that Rogaldorn is dead. I don't care what it has, it's destroyed, right? It's out of this world. It blows up. Done. Here's the problem, though. You have just used, even though it's a good trade, right? This is a good trade. 200 points for 240 points. That's a good trade, right? However, most likely you didn't need all these fire dragons. That's one. Two, if your opponent's able to capitalize on this and kill all of them, you have virtually no hard killing anymore. You have no hard target elimination. So your fire dragons are now destroyed, and the second Rogaldorn that comes out is going to be very hard to kill. It's going to be much harder because all you have is Bright Lances. Dark Reapers are going to be wounding on 5s. You're going to need to really hope that you roll high on those lethal and sustained hits with the Dark Reapers to, do any damage to it. So it's going to be a little tough. And it's possible. The good thing about Aspect Host, guys, is that your whole army, like your shooting units, can actually do significant damage against hard targets because of that lethal hit strat. So it's not the end of the world. It's not like you auto lose the game because you can't trade anymore. But sometimes it's better to do something like this, right? Instead of moving, well, let me put it this way, right? You have 2 squads of 5 fire dragons. One of these units that you have, you don't actually deploy. You just drop them off right here, right? Before you move, you drop your fire dragons right here behind this ruin wall. There's really nothing over here that's going to threaten them probably. So you move them like right here or something like that. And now they're here. So now what you can do is you move up your Zerman squad, right? And they try to kill the fire dragons. Fire dragons die. They hit you with maybe a demolisher cannon or something like that. Maybe your wave serpent survives, maybe it doesn't. If it does survive, you can move the d6 plus 1 inches back. So see how that's 6 inches. You're not going to be able to move the full distance. You're probably only moving about, honestly, 3 inches, maybe 4. Let's say 4. You're only moving to there. And that's why fade back, a lot of people think fade back is like, oh, it's this really good way of like protecting your transports. It's okay, right? It's an okay way of protecting your transports. It's not guaranteed. It's not a 7-inch move. It's not fire and fade, where you move 14 inches again. So you can perhaps protect it from things over here that are going to shoot it, but you're not going to protect it from things on this side of the board. So you do need to make sure that you're kind of aware of that. Your opponent can very easily stagger their shooting, shoot this stuff first, and then basically shoot this stuff after, whatever it brings to the side. So it's good, but it's not always needed. Fire dragons are dead. They're going to be dead, right? But now your opponent has obviously also maybe brought in a second Rogaldorn over here, or maybe brought in a Chimera or something like that to take the objective, put infantry on it. Obviously, this wave serpent's destroyed. Now you have a second unit of fire dragons that can deal with whatever your opponent brings out, right? Instead of the other scenario where both your fire dragons are dead, and now you're thinking, okay, now I have to rely on a falcon to do it. Which the falcon, it's a good anti-large platform, kind of, but it's not reliable enough, right? It's not a reliable platform. It's not fire dragons. So you need to think about how much you actually need to kill something. In Aspect Host, if you're rerolling hits, wounds, and damage rolls with your fire dragons, that's typically enough to kill a Rogaldorn battle tank, especially with Ignore's cover, and perhaps even lethal hits or sustained hits, right? Your stratagem can very easily just, you can very easily wipe out a Rogaldorn with just a simple squad of fire dragons and an aspect token. Because basically what you do, and I'll show you guys right now. You guys probably already know this, but I'm going to show you anyway. Right? You have the Exarch with the fire pike, and then you have the 5 fire dragons. Now, basically what happens here is the 5 fire dragons are hitting on 3s, but they're re-rolling all their hits, and so is the Exarch. So the first thing we're doing is seeing what hits we get, and we're going to have sustained hits for this one. Maybe Ignore's cover as well. So basically, we re-roll this, see what it does, it hits. So we're going to change one of these to a 6. We didn't get any natural 6s, which kind of sucks, but we're going to change. And by the way, guys, you could just roll for 6s if you wanted to, but we're going to just change this to a 6. That's going to proc sustained, so we're going to get another one. Now we're going to roll to wound. The reason I like the fire pike wounds easier, right? So we don't have to save the aspect shrine token for it. We're just going to roll. We need 5s or 4s on the fire pike. We're going to get basically, wow, yeah, we're going to get a good amount of them. These don't wound, so we're going to reroll wounds on these. And we get 4, right? Now, chances are, unless your opponent's bringing a tech priest or something, they're not going to be able to do a lot. And if you wanted to, you can actually also use the stratagem that allows you to ignore damage modifiers. That means that the Rogaldorn's blanket damage does not work. So the Rogaldorn is getting 6 up saves. You're probably not going to see it save many. Yeah, only saves once. And then you just get to roll 3 dice against it with melt to 3. So on average dice, you're doing 19 damage, right? And you get a reroll, by the way. So you can reroll this 3 if you want to, but this actually kills, right? This is 13 plus 9. That's going to be enough damage to kill it multiple times. So with the right stratagem support, like with the right stratagem management, you don't need 2 squads of fire dragons to kill a big target like this. I'm sure you guys knew that, but I just wanted to show you guys because I have seen some players who think they actually do need 10 fire dragons to kill a Rogaldorn. You don't. I know it's a Predator Annihilator here, guys, but it's in spirit a Rogaldorn. Right? So you don't need all the Docker for that. And that means, yeah, that's 2 CP, but it's well worth it because you can save a unit. And the Eldar units are really expensive, so you need to, like, okay, like for example, I'd rather use an extra CP on an ability that's going to guarantee that one of my units is going to kill another unit and make a great trade than using an additional unit. Like, I'd rather use one CP once over another additional unit to be able to shoot it, right? I think any veteran player would do the same. Okay, so that's basically what it is. So how did this game go? Well, it went very well. It was a very good matchup for this army. I had so much the Fire Dragons did amazing. The Dark Reapers did amazing. Like the Chimeras and the Tauroxes that he had. He had a mixed combined arms build, I think. So he had infantry and tanks, but he was running, I think it was mechanized assault or something like that, where he gets to advance and disembark with his guys. So there was a couple of things that he did right off the bat that I was unaware of. Like auto advance 6 meant Tauroxes could just move like 17 inches or 16. It was like 18 inches, something crazy. So he was moving his models up and really fast. But unfortunately for him, I just had the firepower to kill him once he got out into the open on the objective. So he was throwing things on objectives, and I was just popping them as fast as I could, counterattacking with units like Banshees, right? And then just kind of just rinsing and repeating multiple times. The Rogaldorn battle tanks, he had a lot of points in those. He had 2 of those. He had a tank commander, and I want to say an exterminator or something like that, Lehman Russ, but those were not hard to bring down. Fire Dragons basically killed 2 of them, and like I said, he actually had a commander back here, so I had left one of my Fire Dragons back here. He had brought up the commander to kill the Wave Serpent, and yeah, the Wave Serpent died, unfortunately, to the combined might of the Rogaldorn and Tank Commander. But with the death of the Wave Serpent, see, my opponent thought, oh, now that the Wave Serpent's dead, I don't really have to worry about the Fire Dragons. Well, you know, Fire Dragons move 7 plus 2 plus an advance, right? So I can go pretty far with them. I can go 9 inches plus an advance roll. So I could advance. I actually advanced 5. I was like right here. He had a couple of things right here, and I was just, boom, easy kills, right? Pretty insane damage these Fire Dragons can do, honestly. But yeah, you know, I think Aspect Host, it's really hard hitting. I think the only problem with the Aspect Host is the chances of, going against some sort of melee build that's going to try to tie you up in melee. The great thing about this particular build that I selected was we have a lot of screening in it. We have a lot of fights first. We have a lot of combat. So what a fast melee build will try to do is they'll try to set up on you behind these ruins, right? They'll put units behind this, and then there's nothing you could do to shoot them. So then they're going to just come straight at you, and they're going to get 6-inch or 5-inch charges on you across the entire board. And so when that happens, theoretically, I haven't gone into battle against my Blood Angels bunny yet to kind of test this out with Aspect Host, but with War Host, it was kind of similar. You use these Banshees to just wipe them out. So they move to 16, and then they get a very easy charge. Jane Czar, you could even charge 2 units of Assault Intercessors and kill pretty much all of them with Jane Czar. She's really beast mode. And you have the support of the Striking Scorpions. We have Lycus and Warp Spiders who can, kind of go forward, shoot, and then charge in, and then provide a good overwatch. You could always fade back as well if you need to. Like if either of these units get shot and you're in a position to fade back the Phoenix Lord behind this rune to hide her, you can do so. And it's actually a really good maneuver to do so because saving the Phoenix Lord is big time. Like the Phoenix Lord's going to kill another unit, right? Like the Phoenix Lord is really strong. So if you can save that, even if you lose all the other Howling Banshees or all the other Warp Spiders, it's worth it to use fade back on it. So yeah, I'm a real big fan of this build in particular. I think the only changes I would have made, again, is I perhaps would have swapped the Storm Guardians maybe for something else. But the Storm, I mean, they scored me objective points. Maybe I think actually more so the Shroud Runners. I think the Shroud Runners, they did fine. They cleaned up some combat engineers on the first turn. But that's all they did. Then they died. So I think realistically, even though they almost made up their points, it's kind of one of those situations where maybe another unit would have been better. But that's just me. That's totally just me. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section about this build. What could be improved in it? I'm very happy with Jane Czar, the 5 Banshees, Lycus, the 5 Warp Spiders, the 5 extra Warp Spider. I'm happy with all the Aspect Warriors and the distributions of them. I'm just wondering if maybe the Shroud Runners are something that can be swapped out for like maybe a Viper. I think a Viper probably just does better, right? But again, I don't know. Let me know in the comment section. All right, back to the video in just a second. All right, so in conclusion, Aspect Host is a very powerful detachment that specializes in cracking some of the hardest targets in the entire game. The key to using this detachment successfully lies in careful positioning and unit management to maximize damage against the right targets, as it does lack any way of being defensive or any meaningful fallback stratagem. So it lacks pretty much the ability to, have any durability. Its durability is very low, and it doesn't have anything to allow it to fall back and shoot or charge. So that is an issue. So you do need to play this list very, very well. And I think it's very strong into certain matchups and certain metas, but it doesn't have those mobility stratagems, defensive stratagems, or, the fallback, shoot and charge strat, which is kind of bad, right? And the other thing is this detachment is really strong, but it also basically only has 5 stratagems because one of the strats is Avatar of Cain only. So you need to include the Avatar of Cain to be able to use it, and I just don't think the Avatar of Cain is good enough to warrant using even in this detachment. I think if you're going to use the Avatar of Cain, it's best in this detachment, but at the same time, it's really just not that great, right? And in most cases, actually between you and me, I'd honestly rather use it in Warhost so I can put lightning fast reflexes on it, or lightning fast reactions. All right, guys, let me know what you guys think about the Aspect Host. I think it's really strong. It was really fun playing it and getting all the rerolls and stuff. Really powerful detachment, honestly. And I can't wait to play more games with it. I can't wait for that Combat Patrol to come out so we can, I can grab a couple of units of Warp Spiders from it and Dire Avengers, which I technically already have. I have a converted unit of Guardians for that, which I recently painted up. But I just can't wait to play all the aspects. It's going to be super fun. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and thank you to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last 2+ years. Your help has been greatly appreciated, and you have helped the channel grow significantly and much better. I also have a channel store page and am an Amazon affiliate. So if you want to grab some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon or some Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page, grab a, Aspect Warrior beanie or, a Dire Avenger beanie or whatever, a shirts. So basically I have shirts, hats, beanies, sweaters, all kinds of stuff, cups, if you want to drink your coffee with Eldrad, you can. And yeah, check it out if you want to. Lastly, if you are wondering how to, become a Patreon member, you can do so for free. You just have to click on the link in the description and you can just sign up for a free trial, which will give you access to our Discord community, which is made up of players and enthusiasts who love talking about Eldar strategies, tactics, and of course, hobby. So I'll leave the link in the description for you guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody, and peace out.